Hello and welcome. I want to thank you for joining us for the presentation, Using Simulation to Improve Store Operations. We truly appreciate your time and look forward to answering your questions at the end of the presentation. My name is Jill West, Senior Marketing Communications Manager at Impinj. Joining me today are Leslie Hand, Research Director in IDC Retail Insights, and Larry Arnstein, Impinj's Vice President of Business Development. For today's presentation, Larry and Leslie will discuss Impinj's new Store Performance Simulator and how it can provide valuable insights to retailers. We will be addressing all questions at the end of the presentation. If you take a look at the right side of your screen, you will see a question and answer box. If you have a question at any time during the call, please enter it into the box. If we are unable to answer your question during the call, we will follow up with you offline. Okay, with that, let's begin. Leslie?
Thanks, Jill. So I just wanted to start by saying a few words about why we're here and why I was excited to participate in this webinar. We all know that doing business in this, in this omni-channel retail environment is forcing retailers to reevaluate the appropriate mix and placement of inventory across their distributed retail enterprises. Retailers have a dire need to reduce losses, reduce inventory holdings. I got to take a drink of water, excuse me.
That's okay, Leslie. We'll bear with you here.
Okay. And to make human resources more productive and satisfied with their work. I don't know what's going on.
That's all right, Leslie. Do you want me to go ahead and start and see?
Yeah, why don't you start and I can sum up my comments later.
That sounds great. Take care of yourself. Get a drink of water, and we'll be fine. So, and Leslie, I do want to say that I really appreciate your enthusiasm for what we're doing here and for being here today. And just we'll hear back from you in a minute or two. So before we get into the examples and demonstrations of SPS, or the Store Performance Simulator, I want to take a couple of minutes to explain why we built it and to explain why we think it's an important tool. I'll start with two of what I believe to be non-controversial statements. The first one is that managing retail operations is hard. If your job is to manage a chain of stores, then one thing you know is that you really don't know what's happening in those stores every day. If the handbook says to replenish every 2 hours, maybe it's really only happening once a day, and maybe it depends on who's working. If you expect great on-shelf availability but don't have it, even just for a week or two, would you know? And would you be able to tell that your associates are spending big chunks of their time chasing things out of backstock? It's this lack of visibility into day-to-day operations that blocks accountability. And what I mean by this is, how can you expect good performance and good results if you can't even measure enough to give incentives and reward people for doing well? It's not just for store personnel. I think the interesting thing is that it actually flows back to merchants too. If I'm a merchant responsible for a specific style, and that style does not sell well in some stores, how can I know for sure why? Was it execution or was it planning? If you can't pin down the execution side of the equation, then you can't pin down the planning side either. That's the first big issue. The second big issue is that if you don't know how well you are executing to the plan today, how can you make the case for changes? Should you add more service staff, increase cycle counting, maybe increase or decrease your inventory levels, speed up the supply chain? The question is, what is the baseline, and how much better are you going to get by making these changes? And without good data and good understanding of your existing process, it's really hard to make the case to make those improvements. These are two statements that I think, unfortunately, are pretty much accepted as facts of life in retail. So people may not even realize how much money is being left on the table. And we're trying to do something about that. I think there is only one answer to the first problem. It's that you need better data, and it's clear that many retailers think RFID is the way to get it. The second problem, I'll admit, is a lot trickier, because even with good data, you need to be able to make predictions that are specific to your business. You have to take a stand based on something. But retailers are unique. And here we have pictures of a superstore, of specialty retailers, department stores, and there are huge differences between retailers even within these segments. So one retailer's experience does not necessarily apply to yours. You can't just copy what the other guy is doing and expect to get the same results. The other thing is that experiments in retail are notoriously difficult. They're expensive to do, changing how a store works and training your staff and all that stuff. But the worst part is that sometimes, frequently, they're inconclusive. And this is due, by the way, also to lack of data about what's happening. If you just get point-of-sale data and you've done an experiment, there's a lot of other things that influence point of sale data. You need other metrics to be able to know if the changes are giving you what you want. What's even more important, so this is where simulation can be an extremely powerful tool, and not just because it can spit out predictions. What's even more important is that it helps you turn what I would call tribal knowledge. These are the things that somebody in your company knows into what you might call institutional knowledge, which is what everyone knows and can effectively use to measure performance and make decisions. The power of converting this tribal knowledge into institutional knowledge really cannot be overstated. So I've put I put the following little animation together to explain what we mean by execution versus planning and how difficult it can be to sort out performance issues. But I also want to use this as a way to explain what the Impinj Store Performance Simulator, I'll call it SPS from now on, is really doing under the hood. So, and then I'll get into some examples of using the simulator to get some insight into what I mean by data-driven retailing and how things can be much better. So with that, let's take a look at this illustration. What I have here is the first scenario I'm going to go through is what I would call perfect operation. So the planners have said, we want to have this particular assortment of product on the shelf because we think that matches what our shopper profiles are going to be like. So store folks, supply chain, get it done. And they did get it done. And so now we have shoppers coming into our store, and they're finding what they want on the shelf. And over the course of the season, in the beginning, of course, you got great fulfillment, but now all of a sudden someone comes in and we have an out-of-stock situation. We didn't have their size. Another out-of-stock situation at the end of the season or at the end of the day. You've got some things, some lost sales opportunities, and you've got some stuff left that needs to be marked down. And we can say, because we had perfect operations, we can say that this is all due to planning. So whether this is a good outcome or a bad outcome is not really the argument I'm making. What I'm saying is that this outcome can be attributed entirely to planning. So the planners might have done a better job, or maybe this is exactly what they wanted to have happen. So now we can imagine a scenario where operations aren't so perfect. In this particular case, we've got one mistake. Instead of having an extra large and an extra small, we've got two extra smalls, and we're missing the extra large. So what we can do here with this little simulation is run the same exact set of shoppers through the store and see what the outcome is. And I'm not going to take you through the actual animation again, but you can see that we're going to have one more out-of-stock event, and we're going to have one more item left to put on sale at the end of the season. And what we can say is that the differences here are due entirely to execution. The problem is that they kind of look the same. And if you're just looking at point of sale results and markdowns, you still can't really pin down whether this is an execution or a planning issue. So the first question I'll ask is, how can you tell the difference? Well, you could tell the difference if, for example, you had the ability to find out how good your on-shelf availability is. How well does that on-shelf assortment of product match what the planner said you should have? If you have that data, now you can go back and say, well, planners, you did a good job, but execution didn't execute. Or likewise, you might say, hey, no, the store did really well, and we have a planning issue. So being able to tell the difference depends on having data. And also, you could ask yourself, how can you improve operations? It'd be nice if you could replay your store for a year with the same set of shoppers, but try things differently. Maybe we should have a little more front stock and less in back, or maybe we should shorten our supply chain or have more staff available to provide service. It'd be nice to be able to do that over and over again under different conditions, and that's exactly what motivated the development of the Store Performance Simulator, so that we could look at how these big variables affect outcomes. So let's take a look at the Store Performance Simulator. I'll explain a little bit about it, and then we'll get into some examples of how to use it. So to start with, I've already introduced you to some of the players in the simulator, which is the shoppers and the front stock. You can see that I've got my shoppers and my front stock, but also in my store I've got some clearance of merchandise, things that are on sale from last season. I have back stock, and I have store associates whose job it is to keep the inventory managed, but also help the shoppers when necessary. Finally, there's a distribution center whose job it is to replenish the store, resupply the store based on point of sale activity or reordering from the store, and that gives us sort of a complete model of the store. Now, the question becomes, what are the inputs? And one of the things that we kind of challenged ourselves when we built this tool was we wanted these inputs to be things that retailers either can or should be able to know. So we don't have any inputs that really ought to be outputs here. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So some of the inputs are things like operational parameters. How many hours are you open? What's the supply chain responsiveness? Is it once a week resupply or once a month? What are the customer service levels? If the shopper's in the store and can't find what they want, what are the odds that they're going to get some help maybe to get something out of the back? Merchandise data. How many styles and SKUs? What are the inventory levels? Do you have one of everything in the front and two in the back, or vice versa? What's shopper traffic like? And is this a highly seasonal market, or are you in a replenishment business? Going on, we can talk about inventory management. How often do we cycle count? And what's the replenishment activity like? Is it once a day, every hour? And what are the shrink rates that complement that? And then, of course, there's some financial data so that we can tally things up. On the output side, these are things that retailers want to know. What's my conversion rate going to be if I make this change? You know, if I increase my supply chain responsiveness, do I get better on-shelf availability? And what's the consequences of sales? When you talk to people about investing in inventory management and improving operations, one of the hardest things that they have is drawing a line between these inputs and these outputs. And the fact of the matter is, there's no formula you can put into a spreadsheet that will relate these inputs to these outputs. You've got to just try it. And we know that trying these things in a store is very difficult. So we built a simulator so that you could try it with your computer. And we've been lucky because we had the opportunity to, and you know, do some what-if scenarios. So we were lucky because we had the opportunity to try this with a major Fortune 500 brand owner retailer. And we were lucky because we caught them just at the right time when they were launching an internal program to try to improve on-shelf availability. And this had nothing to do with the use of RFID. This was strictly seeing if they could do better if they tried harder. And we caught them at a time when they said, you know, we're really interested in the simulation model. I wonder what it will tell us and if we can get it to match up with what's really happening in our stores. And so we did some modeling of their baseline as-is operations, and we were able to see that our predictions about what their on-shelf availability would be were pretty well aligned with what they actually measured when they did weekly counts during this program. And then they made some changes, and they did some intensive training for their personnel, and they did some other things to try to improve. We were able to build those into the model as well, and sure enough, the Store Performance Simulator predicted pretty much what they saw in practice as a consequence of making these changes. So that was the validation phase of this work. We then went into the insight phase, which was trying different things and saying, hey, you know, why do we see this input really affecting that output, and what's the reason for that? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the insights that we gained, and I'm going to use the Store Performance Simulator to demonstrate that. And then the neat thing is they actually used these insights and the scenarios we developed to help them set priorities for which things they really ought to implement in their stores. So we're now working forward with them on what to do about it. Anyway, I wanted you to know that this is something that's been under development for a couple of years now, and it's been really tested in a practical environment, and we've seen some good results. So with that, I'm going to show you how it works. Okay? And what I'm going to do is take you through 3 stories. And at the end of each story, I'm going to give Leslie a chance to ask some questions. And her role really is to represent the perspective of the retailers in this conversation. And it will be interesting to see what kind of questions that she comes up with as we go through this. And then at the end, we'll want to open that up more to the audience. So I'm going to now switch over to the Store Performance Simulator. And I'm going to, there's a lot going on here, and we're going to take our time and go through it. And I'll explain things as we go. So basically there's 2 sides to the simulator. There's the input side, which is over here, and the output side, which is over here. And on the input side, we can choose different scenarios from a library of predefined scenarios, or we can make our own by editing these fields. And so you can see that I've got the basic scenario loaded up on both sides. And the idea is that you load a scenario up in both sides of this input side, and when you put the simulator, it goes off and actually runs the store for a year with those shoppers coming and going, and it basically will tally up what happens every day and give you the results both in summary form but also in a detailed report. And so we've got our basic store, and the reason I've chosen a basic store at first was that I wanted to just show you what insight we can get from working with an overly simplified example. That'll be and once I go through that, I'll take a break and let Leslie ask some questions, and then we'll go into a more realistic scenario and look at how can we use this as a way of assessing different options for improving store operations. So here I've got my basic situation. My store is open 365 days a year, 10 hours a day. I'm supposed to replenish every 10 hours or once a day. We reorder from the DCs every 2 days, and it takes 2 days for the goods to get here, and so on and so forth. We'll get into some of those specifics as we look at the results. So I run my simulation, and I get a summary that tells me I've sold 33,000 items for this year at an average price of $40 because I've got no markdowns in this simple store. I've had some revenue, and I've got about 11.8% net operating margin. And we can kind of drill in and look at a couple of things. So for one, I'll show you my shopper activity. So you can see that my shopper activity averages about 70 shoppers per day. And sure enough, I'm open 10 hours per day, and I've got 7 shoppers per hour. So the shopping activity, you can see, relates to the inputs. Let's take a look at conversion rate. So the conversion rate starts out very high. It starts out at 100% because every shopper is finding something because all the SKUs are represented on the shelf. I have a perfect on-shelf availability. But as those shoppers buy things, you can see that they're starting to degrade on-shelf availability, and as a consequence, future shoppers are having more trouble finding what they want. Of course, we get to a point where we're replenishing enough so that it stabilizes between 80 and 85%, conversion rate, and that's a nice result. So, and by the way, real conversion rates in stores may turn out to be a lot lower than this because we don't have any window shoppers coming into this store. Everybody here, all of our shoppers are really looking for something to buy, and if they find it, they'll buy it. So, so the conversion rates might seem a little bit high for practical purposes. So what I want to do now is make one small change and see how that affects these results. And we'll show you some other outputs that we can see when we make that change. And the change I'm making is I'm increasing the service level. And what the service level, the best way to think about it is it's the chance that a shopper, when they need help finding something, particularly something that they can't find in their size but they want in the store, what chance they'll get someone available to come and look in the back and see if it's there. So that's what this service level is. And you can see that if I change that service level to be higher, a couple things happen. My ability to sell merchandise, well, you can see right away that my conversion rate goes up. That's the blue line is higher than the orange line. That's this column versus this column. And you can see that that's the one thing that's different here. And I'm getting, as long as the green line is above the orange line, you can see that's a higher conversion rate. So if I go now to selling from the back, which is an interesting situation. I remember talking with a major retailer about whether or not they think they can effectively sell from the back, and her answer was, well, we can, but we don't really want to because it's costly to do that. So indeed, selling from the back goes up quite a bit when you increase your service level. It improves your profit margin, your sales volume increases by 3.1%. And this is where I want to point out that there's no magic formula in this simulator that relates service level to selling from the back. It's just what happens when we run shoppers through our store in a simulated environment. So being able to actually draw a line between a service level and a sales increase is a unique capability of this tool. So I'd like you to pay mostly the attention to this unit sales increase. Don't worry too much about the profit margin. That's a little bit more, involves some financial stuff that I'm not going to get into detail here. But unit sales increase is very interesting. But the other thing that's interesting is that it's taken me more labor to do that. And I'm showing you that I've got 6.4K more expenditure, almost 2K more expenditure on just the activity of going to the back and finding stuff. So the next thing I want to do is look at something that's, instead of a positive, let's look at something that maybe is a negative. So I'm going to bring service level down to 50%. I'm going to add shrink. And let's see what shrink does to our performance of this basic store. So we're running the simulation again, and I'll reiterate that when we click compare, we're actually simulating the store twice. Once under these conditions, and once under these conditions. And the only difference between these two situations or two scenarios is the 3% shrink, and that's 3% of sales. So for every 100 items I sell, 3 disappear off my shelves. So if you look first at conversion rate, you get a very interesting thing here. At first, the difference between, there's no difference between the two scenarios because, my shrink hasn't really accumulated into a problem yet. But over time, my conversion rate starts to degrade. And if we drill into that a little bit and look at our hidden out of stock situation, you'll understand why. So hidden out of stocks are a situation where the store believes, the store management or the store database believes that an item is available to shoppers in the front of the store, but in fact, it's not. And since nobody knows it, it's not getting replenished. And so hidden out of stocks under the baseline scenario, or under the basic scenario without shrink, stays very low, but accumulates over time under the basic scenario and under the situation with shrink. And I'll let you know that even into these conditions, it is possible for the store personnel, the associates, to discover those hidden out of stocks and repair them. But even with that going on, we get some accumulation and conversion rates degrade. So if we look at the summary, what's really interesting here is that this shrink actually hits this income statement in 3 different ways. First, our units sold is down. So what we're saying here is that we've lost sales due to out-of-stock situations and hidden out of stocks as a consequence of that theft or that shrinkage. So we've sold 900 fewer items this year than we would have if we didn't have the shrink. Our revenues are down because of that loss of sales, but even worse, our variable costs are up $7,000 because we had to buy the merchandise that got stolen. So those are completely independent phenomena. One is increased cost because we're buying more merchandise that we're not selling. The other one is sales loss. But here's one that sort of surprised me, or when you think about it, it makes sense. Our labor costs are going up too. Why is that? The reason our labor cost is going up is because we have employees thinking that their little handheld terminal is telling them they've got something in the store that the shopper wants. So instead of saying, no, I'm sorry, we don't have it, they're going into the back to look for something that's not there either. And so you've got a lot of wasted effort on shoppers running around, store associates running around looking for things that aren't really in the store. So that's actually a third way that shrink hits your bottom line. And that's something that emerges from the simulator that you don't even, it's not programmed in, if you know what I mean. So I think the point of this was just to show you that even with this basic model, we can gain real insight into the connections between these inputs and these outputs. And then if we go a little further and work a little harder and try to make it more realistic, we can start to get meaningful quantitative results as well. So that's what we're going to do next. Just before I let Leslie ask some questions, I'm going to load up the baseline model, compare that to, let me just refresh this here. Load up the baseline model, compare that to my basic model, and we'll talk a little bit about the differences here after I give Leslie a shot. So Leslie, if you're back online, please let me know if you've got any questions so far.
I am here, and I think my voice has come back. So you know, one of the things that comes to mind is, you know, as an ex-retailer, I wonder how the retailer goes about kind of gathering or establishing those baseline values, or do you actually provide some benchmark data to get them started? How does that work?
Okay, well, one of the principles that we kept in mind when we built this tool was that every retailer is unique. And so what we regard as the baseline or the benchmark is your own data. So it's really important that if you were to take this as more than just a sort of an informational tool and you wanted to put it to work in your business, the first thing you would do is actually compare, you know, your revenues and your store performance against what's in your own financial statement. So we want to see if we're getting the same kind of net results out of the simulation as we would get out of your own data. So that's really the benchmark, is to validate the as-is situation. One of the things that we experience a lot when we talk with retailers is it really possible to know all of these things? And I would say that there's, in most retailers, there's no one person that does know all of these things, but somebody in your business knows these things. And if you sit down and go through it, you can feel very comfortable estimating the inputs to these models. And you'll find that the ones that you aren't so sure about, you can get at pretty easily by doing some research. So we've designed it to be usable by retailers. We've tried to be very true to the way retailers think about their business, and we want to think of the retailer's data as the source for validation.
Very good. And you know, I'm also curious, I see that with each simulation you run, there are different parameters highlighted in yellow. Are those the parameters that are kind of in play for each one of the simulations? What's going on there, just to help me understand?
Right. So all of these parameters are editable, and each one of them I think is interesting and important in various ways, and are a lot of what distinguishes one retailer from another. So they're all available for editing and changing. The yellow ones are what's different between the left and right scenario. So in this case, the baseline versus the basic are showing where we've got differences. It just helps you kind of focus what's going on in the particular situation.
That makes sense. So then, are you seeing in your trials with retailers that there are particular what-if scenarios that they're most interested in testing? Are there places where you've been most successful?
Yeah, so with the case study that I would encourage you to download, if you go to sps.impinj.com/ well, if you just go there, you'll find it, but it's under case_study.php. If you go look at that, what you'll see is that they did look at some specific things in the what-if phase of the work we did. So they looked at speeding up the supply chain. So one of the things that we discovered in the process of working with them, that they had a lot of backstock, much more than we kind of expected would be realistic. But when you looked at it, you realize that they were kind of bracing themselves for 14 days of not receiving product from their DCs and so forth. So what we did was that if we had a reliable, fast resupply, could they really cut that backstock down, and how would that help their business? So we looked at stuff, again, it had nothing to do with RFID, but how could they optimize their operations? So those are some of the things we looked at. We also looked at things that are in this, frankly, in some of the scenarios we've built. We've looked at increasing service and putting more effort into stock management, but also we looked at RFID. And we're going to kind of take you through, in this next couple stories, some of the same things that we did with that particular retailer.
Great.
Anything
no
else?
other questions? No other questions here.
Okay. So if that's good, then what we're going to do is start looking at a more realistic situation and see what that tells us about what we can do here. So I've loaded up baseline versus basic. First, just to kind of illustrate the difference. And I don't want you to look at the financial summary. These are not comparable stores. What I want to do is show you what some of the additional things that are going on here. If we look at our shoppers, and let's see, hit the comparison button here. So just run the baseline versus basic. And you remember in our basic situation, the green line, we had, on average 70 shoppers a day, and it was pretty much didn't change from there. But with our baseline scenario, we've got actually 4 seasons per year. And that means we'll have some really busy periods and some real quiet periods. This is to see how our store responds under different shopping loads. And I think that proves to be a really interesting question. And then another thing that I'll show you is that our front stock isn't constant all year long. So we'll look at what our total front stock is, and you can see that it's kind of lined up with the seasons. So even though we say we've got 2 items per unit, per SKU in the front of the store, in reality, under the hood, when the store is more busy, that number floats up a bit. And when the store is less busy, that number floats down. So we've got some dynamics built into the simulator that still keeps the same average, but goes up and down with the seasons. The same is true, by the way, with service level. That's an average throughout the year, but it actually goes down as you get more busy because you've got less ability to help all those customers, and goes up when you're not so busy. So there's a lot of dynamics under the hood that we take advantage of and try to keep things simple from a parameter input standpoint. The other thing that's going on is that we have sales stock and we have seasons. So in addition to having my seasons, which determines how my traffic goes up and down, we've also got 25% of our SKUs. We have 40 styles and 25 variants of each, so that's 1,000 SKUs in the store. We have 25% of those SKUs, or 250 SKUs, get discontinued each season. That's 4 times per year. And whatever left of those SKUs has to go on sale. So what we have is 3 or 4 times a year, nothing in the first time. All the discontinued stuff goes on sale, and you can see that our shoppers like to buy it, so it gets used up pretty quick. But of course, those sale items will erode full price sales during the time that they're there. And then we've got a couple other things that I'll talk about a little bit later. But I just wanted to give you a sense of what's going on with a more realistic store. The other thing that we've done is we've said we're going to do cycle counting twice a year instead of once a year. And that's not really cycle counting. That's a physical inventory. We use the word cycle count, but in this case, it's a physical inventory. We've got a little bit of error built in. And this is an interesting parameter. It says we've got 75% replenishment accuracy error. That means when the point of sale reports we need these 10 items replenished from backstock, the store associate's going to get 7 or 8 of them right. And we've got shrink. So that's kind of the baseline situation. And what we're going to now do is explore some conventional ways of improving performance within the constraints of this store. So what I want to do is load up the idea of let's put more effort into stock, into managing stock. And this is actually pretty close to what this case study, we did in the case study, because the retailer there said we're going to count our inventory every week and see how we're doing. And we're going to replenish, and we're going to try to really do a better job. So this is really comparable to what they did on their own. And so if we run that simulation, what we can see is a couple of things. On-shelf availability does, in fact, go up. So we'll look at on-shelf availability, and we can see the green lines above the orange line all year. And so that's telling us that, on average, 5 or more % of my SKUs are available to customers at any given time. It's also interesting to look at another metric, which is front assortment, which is not only is there at least one available, that's what that's telling us here, but does the quantities of those things match what the plan, how close does it match what the merchandiser said should be on the shelf at any given time? We don't want to have 100% here. That means nobody's buying anything, but we want to, but all things being equal, higher is better. So let's take a look also at selling from the back. We can see that, oh no, I didn't want to do that yet. Let's go to scenario labor cost. This is what I want to show you, is that there's a real downside to trying to do a better job of inventory management through conventional means. Once a week, I've got to take a full inventory count, and it's expensive. And you can see that showing up in my scenario labor cost metric. And you can also see that there's kind of a cost and a benefit here. I've got this spike of labor that I have to put in every week. But interestingly enough, there's some savings here as well. And the savings are due to the fact that I'm getting less stuff from the back from my customers. I'm spending less time going from the back, and yet I've got pretty good sales results. So there's a savings that comes here too. It's just that it doesn't net out very well. Those additional labor costs actually are higher. Net, you end up with more labor in your store operations. And we do have a benefit. We have a 2% sales increase and a 4.5% profit increase. However, if we want to be sort of honest about this and say we don't want to pay that extra labor cost, let's go ahead and drop and I happen to know that we've got to drop our service level to 20% to recover that difference. That means that we're helping fewer shoppers get things from the back. And if we do that and we even out our labor costs, you can see that we have a net reduction in unit sales. So the point here is that the benefits of cycle counting are of manual or heavy lifting and stock labor is questionable. And which is probably why that it's done strategically in response to real problems after the fact, after those problems are known, but why it's not a general common practice in retail to count everything every week. And I think it's nice to see that the simulator kind of supports that general practice. So again, I'll take a break and ask Leslie if this has raised any questions in her mind.
Well, one of the things that comes to mind for me is, having been a retailer and having been involved in developing some applications around cycle counting. I know there are a lot of retailers out there who've tried to embed intelligence into some of their cycle counting processes. For instance, they might have gone and said, if I don't see stock movement over some period of time, or if I'm not replenishing stock on some regular frequency, then go and cycle count the store, and they send either paper or reports out to stores for them to complete. So why is it that or just how much smarter, I suppose, is the question. How much smarter is the simulator, and how does it improve on those kinds of processes? Well,
there's actually kind of two questions in there. The first is, what would the simulator tell you about that? And so if you were to work with us, let's say, you found this presentation to be compelling, but you say, counting everything or counting nothing, we don't really operate that way. We do some strategic counting. We can easily build that into this model and say, okay, let's implement strategic counting and see what the benefits of that are. So that's something that I would say is well within the power of the simulator to model and capture. The bigger answer to the question is that fundamentally, retailers regard cycle counting as a trade-off today. You don't do it unless you have to. There's a cost. There's a benefit. You're trying to figure out whether it's worth doing or not. And one of the things that I'd like to challenge the retailer community to say is, hey, maybe we don't have to live within that trade-off. And that's going to be the subject of the next set of stories, will be how can we break out of that trade-off and actually have our cake and eat it too. Okay?
Yeah.
Anything else?
Yeah, so then the other kind of basic question is, of course, retailers have perpetually been challenged to get inventory right, and we know that it is frequently not right, right, where our inventory levels are not accurate. So how does this simulator help us identify what the level of improvement is that stems simply by improving visibility to inventory? Can it do that for us?
Right. So, I mean, I guess it probably goes without saying that having visibility alone really doesn't do anything for you. You've got to take action on that information. And so, one of the things that the simulator does, it not only kind of estimates or helps you understand what the impact on inventory accuracy is going to be, but it helps you play with how you would use that data to change the way you do things. And the stories that we're going to get to next will bear that out. And the other thing that it helps you do is say, not all visibility is created equal. Counting the entire store with a handheld scanner is one form of visibility. Having what we're calling center point visibility, having some data about what's moving between the back and front stock on a regular basis, in a real-time basis, is a different kind of visibility. And it'd be nice if you could actually make a good strategic decision about where to start. And so there's no question that this tool can help you explore those options.
Great, thanks.
Okay, so those are good questions. I'd like to go on to my third story here, and this is the last story that we're going to do. Then we're going to open up some questions if there are any, and actually have some concluding statements from Leslie and myself. So the third story has to do with how can we do more with less using technology to do it. So what I'm going to do is take my stock labor on the right here. That's the scenario, and I'm going to go to the 20% level of service, and because we concluded that was kind of the fair comparison to the baseline. And we'll compare this to the baseline too in the end, so you can see what we're doing. But I wanted to compare stock labor to an RFID weekly count. So now we're going to say, hey, all of our items are tagged with RFID tags. I'm going to maintain a high service level because I believe that I'll have enough labor to do both the counting and the service in my budget. I'm going to be able to count things really fast, let's say 10,000 items per hour. I'm not going to be expecting perfection. I'm going to have a 3% undercount because it's going to be weekly with store employees. Shrink is the same, even though we'll argue later that it doesn't have to be. I'm not even going to make any assumptions about how good the replenishment work is being done. I'm going to assume that because we've got all this data, if we didn't do a great job of replenishment yesterday, we're going to fix that tomorrow. And so we're going to allow compliance to stay low on replenishment. The other thing I'm going to do is show you that, don't worry about this backstock difference. That's something I'll explain. That's a detail that I'll explain later, but that's keeping things even. The fixed cost here, I'm going to spend $25 a day for the RFID counting infrastructure. That's going to pay for my handheld and some software, and I'm going to put an extra dime of cost into each item that I sell. So I'm going to pay for this too in my model. So I'm going to run the comparison and see what we get. This is a accounting-based approach to inventory management. So if we look at the summary, well, first we'll look at on-shelf availability and see what we've got. So I'll go to on-shelf availability, and you can see that between the two scenarios, there's no difference. Well, there's really very little difference, and in fact, it's a little bit not quite as good under the green bar. That's probably because my replenishment accuracy is still not bumped up. So you can see that from an accuracy standpoint, or on-shelf availability, we've made no difference between these two scenarios because the hard work paid off over in the stock labor scenario. If we look at sold from back, however, we've got a lot of labor left over now. My service level is very high. We've got a lot of people available to get things for customers from the back. And yet I'm doing that with a scenario labor cost that is, you can see, spread out evenly throughout the week. It's a little higher than the service cost for my 20% level, but I more than make up for that in the savings on counting. And if you look at the summary, it's great. I'd get a 5.4% sales boost unit sales over this stock labor method because I put my effort into customer service rather than counting. And you can see that my net labor cost that's particular to this scenario is actually lower still, even though I've got that higher service level. So this is, I think, showing that you can break through that trade-off between service and cost, and that RFID is a key way of doing that. You can actually deliver a higher perceived level of service to your customer with less total effort. But there's a downside here, which is that we're still reliant on a full weekly inventory taking, with store employees going around the store with a handheld scanner. It's technology that works, people are deploying it today, but it's not necessarily a desirable approach for many retailers. So what I'd like to do is see if we can even do, if there's another approach. So I'm going to go, I'm going to take weekly, let me see if that's the next thing to do here. Yeah, I'm going to take my weekly, RFID weekly, where are you? There you are. And I'm going to load that up against what I'm calling RFID center point. So this is now, I've still got the same tags on the items in my stores, but instead of a weekly count of the whole store, I'm going to have a reader between the back of house and the front of the house, and I'm going to be able to see the merchandise that's being brought forward. I'm going to be able to tell who's doing it. You know, I'm going to be able to see kind of what's happening between the back and front of the store. And we're going to compare these two scenarios. And you can probably look through this yourself to see where the big differences are, but one of them is here. Back-to-front visibility is existent in this scenario, meaning that for every 100 items I bring forward from the back stock, I can see at least 95 of those. Whereas with a cycle counting approach, I can't see that at all. In fact, you know, it takes a week between counts for me to know that something's been brought forward accurately. So what we're showing here is the following. I'm going to just show you the summary. First of all, it shows that the weekly center point is doing quite well. I've got a 1.6% sales increase above the weekly, which is already a big improvement, and more profit. My total inventory accuracy is, you can see, actually not as good as it is with the weekly count. If I look at my front inventory accuracy, however, and I can look at just the front inventory accuracy, you can see that it's better. So what's happening is I've got a trade-off here. Weekly counting is doing a better job of knowing what's in my entire store. But the center point is giving me a better understanding of what's in the back and what's in the front at any given time. And it turns out that that's going to have a bigger impact in this particular case on conversion rate. So, however, that doesn't hold necessarily if I bump shrink up to, say, 7%. With higher shrink, I've got more inaccuracy at the store level. And you can see that what happens is it starts to even out the benefits of the weekly count versus the, and I'll go to the summary here, versus the center point visibility. I've got a 0% sales, and that means that it's all the same. So just to, you know, kind of close on this, I'm going to load up the baseline just to remind you that we're really, the nice thing about RFID is we don't necessarily have to choose. We want to have that center point visibility, but why wouldn't we also cycle count when convenient or as well? So if I run that comparison, that kind of nets things out for you. And you can see that we get a 7.3% predicted profit increase. My inventory accuracy is very high, both in the front and back, as well as at the entire store level. And I'm paying for it. I've got additional costs and all that stuff built in here. And I think the point I want to make before I turn this back over to Leslie is that the details matter. If you have high shrink and no back room, weekly counting is very important. If you have modest shrink and a lot of inventory in the back or even some inventory in the back, then a center point probably has more kick for your benefit. And you know that these two things solve different problems. The point here is that there's a lot of things that you can do to make this look like your business and to help you draw conclusions that are important and meaningful to you. We'd love to work with you on that. So Leslie, any thoughts about these last set of stories here? And just as let you know, we've got about 15 minutes left.
Yeah. So just a quick question. You know, it's, you know, you've gone through a lot of the examples around when inventory, you know, maybe not in the right place. I'm curious how this supports errors in merchandise planning. You know, how can this help a retailer balance their inventory better once the mistake has already been made? Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I can. So this is actually something that came out. This is something that we learned from the simulator that was a really interesting insight, and I'll share it with you. We clearly see that there's benefit to RFID in this approach. What's interesting is that the benefit to RFID is actually increased, to having this data actually increases when you've got more planning error or planning variance. So I'll show you a little demonstration. So you can see here now, if I have 0 planning error, meaning that my merchandiser has done a perfect job. What that means is that all my buffer stock is right where I need it. It's on those most popular items. And I've got some thin inventory on the least popular items, but I'm least likely to have customers there, so that works out pretty well. If you have planning error, what it means is that you've got buffer stock in the wrong place, and you've got thin inventory in the wrong place. And so you're more susceptible to out of stock. So if we compare let's say the baseline to RFID without planning error, we get a 5.9% unit sales increase. If we compare RFID, let's say I have an extreme amount of planning error, if we compare our baseline to RFID with planning error, then you can see that 5.9% jumps up to 7.8%. In other words, we have a bigger sales lift between. What I don't want you to take away from this is that RFID can give you a sales lift. It can fully compensate for planning error. It doesn't. When you have planning error, you're going to have lost sales. It's just that you get more benefit out of RFID in that situation. It protects you on the downside, is the point I'm trying to make. You can see that same effect. I'm not going to run it for you now, but you can see the same effect when you reduce your front stock levels. When you reduce front stock levels, you have less buffer, less protection, and that means those inaccuracies hurt you worse, and RFID becomes more valuable. So you can actually play those same kinds of games with this tool.
Okay, that's great. So one last question before you let me run through some summary. So you know, most of the pilots that I see, you know, are using handhelds, but in your simulation, you kept talking about how Centerpoint's delivering better results. Can you explain why there's a disparity there?
Yeah. So first of all, let me address the concept of better results. So under this particular set of scenarios that I chose and the baseline that we set up, Centerpoint visibility did beat weekly visibility, but that may or may not apply in a particular retailer situation. So they're both very effective means for managing inventory. And if you were to start a project today, you know, we'd want to look at that with you and see what's the best place to start. Historically, retailers have started with handheld cycle counting, and that's mainly because that was the technology that came out of the gate first and was ready to go. I believe that today, Centerpoint visibility is a viable option, and it actually has some really interesting benefits that go above and beyond the handheld model. So both are valid, both are in play, and I would encourage retailers to work with us on choosing the right approach.
Great. So let's go to my summary slides if we could.
Oh, sure.
Is that, yeah, are you ready for those?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Let me see if I can do that right. So, that's not right. Okay, here we, no, one more try. Okay, so here's Leslie's slides.
There you go. Go to the next one.
Okay.
You're going to push the slides for me. And this one has a build, so you're going to have to pay attention. So just to, you know, to kind of sum up where we are with all of this, you know, we've talked a lot about, you know, how the face of retail has changed and the way that customers shop has changed, and that's driving a need for us as retailers to pay much closer attention to inventory and data accuracy. We want, at the same time we want to drive inventories down, we also want to raise up service levels. So we end up in this position where, you know, the customer has shifted the way they shop, and it's putting pressure on the predictable nature of our inventory. The customer cadence has shifted. So we have to reduce inventory lead times. We have to reduce stock levels in order to avoid excessive costs, markdowns, write-downs, etc. So the old view was to have this diametrically opposed model where servicing costs went up and down in contrast to each other. If you click again, Larry, the newer view is to actually try to balance service and cost. And Larry talked about this. He said, I actually wrote it down as he was talking, that there's higher perceived costs with less effort. So that's where we really want to get to. We want to be able to do all of these retail initiatives I have listed here, things like making shelf level visibility available. We want to be able to do better demand forecasting and replenishment based on real-time information. But in order to get there, we have to make that information available. And in order to be real-time, we have to probably use sensors. So if we go to the next slide, you know, one of the reasons why I was so interested in participating in this webcast was when Larry initially demonstrated the Store Performance Simulator to me. I was struck by how comprehensive and well thought out it was. And as an ex-retailer, I know that we can't always physically test all of the processes and business rules that might be applied in our business. But the simulator enables retailers to complete those what-if scenarios that he walked through based on real metrics from their business. And it enables them to shortcut those scenarios that they might have to do physically. And so, you know, when we try to get to optimal performance at the shelf, and we apply RFID, what we've seen is that retailers that have gone down this path before have seen 90+ more efficient inventory processes. Inventory accuracies improved by 7 to 15%, with accuracies well above 95% with service levels. And importantly, the effort required to replenish sales floor stock from the back room is reduced by 15 to 50%. And retailers ultimately end up with reduced out of stocks, increased sales, and I think probably most importantly, given the fact that customers are less loyal, less patient, and more likely to leave the store when merchandise is out of stock, the customer ends up being much more satisfied. And that in the end leads to continuing profit and increased performance. Next slide. So I wanted to just provide some public examples of retailers that have gone down this path and reported some of the benefits. And you know, we're a little short on time, so I won't read the chart, but this is for your information. And I'll also point out that not on the chart is total reduction of inventory, which of course is a very important metric, because if you have less inventory, you free up cash to do other things. And retailers have reported 3 to 15% reductions in total inventory with RFID-enabled processes. So that's very key, and in my mind, one of the metrics that can certainly motivate your CFO to free up some money to do these kinds of projects. Next slide. So just in closing, I wanted to make sure the audience knew that as attendees of this webcast, I'm making available a report that was just published this spring called Business Strategy, Evaluating Whether RFID is Right for Your Business. There's an overview on this slide. I'd be happy to provide a copy, and also the blog post, there's a link. If you can get access to these slides, you'll be able to click on that, or just go to idc-ri.com and go to our blog, and you'll be able to click on that, and it's free. So that's all I had for today. Larry, good work on this, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Leslie. I guess I shouldn't be on mute there, should I? So I wish I could relate to you all of the insights that we gained from the work we've done building this tool and also working with retailers on it. I mean, there's dozens of stories like the ones I've shared with you just now. Stories about, like Leslie mentioned, inventory reduction. You saw that I actually had a small inventory reduction in one of those models that I ran, and I had to have that because what it turns out is when you have better accuracy, you end up with more inventory in your store if you don't cut your targets back a little bit because you're reordering more accurately. And so there's all kinds of really interesting things that emerged from this work. And I've already told most of these stories that I've got here, but what I want to summarize is to tell you that, we were talking about simulation on the one hand, and we talk about RFID on the other, and there actually is a connection between the two. It would be impossible for me to imagine using a simulation approach like this without having RFID as part of the story. And the reason is that simulation is not something that runs in an ivory tower. It's something that you use and constantly test against real data. And without good real data, it gets really difficult to do that in the long run. So we would encourage anybody out there looking at RFID to also look at working with us on this modeling approach, because putting all that information and knowledge about how your stores work into one place is incredibly powerful. And that's, I think, a closing thought I'd like to leave with you. Impinj, for those of you who don't know who we are a core technology provider. We make products that end up in tags that go on your items. We make the devices that go into the reader infrastructure to handhelds as well as fixed reader capabilities. We have a huge partner network to deliver solutions. But because retail is such an important part of our business, we've chosen to become knowledgeable and gain expertise in this market, and we want to work directly with retailers in understanding your needs and how this technology can feed your business. So that's our interest. And if you want to learn more about the Store Performance Simulator, please go to sps.impinj.com. There's a free version of the tool you saw there. It's got most of the capabilities that I showed you, but obviously what I want to do is have the opportunity to work with you and use this properly as a tool for your business. So please contact us if you'd like to do that. The URL is there for you on the screen. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jill to see if we have any questions from the audience.
Thanks, Larry. Before we get started, I'd just like to remind you that if you have a question, please type it into the question box. And in the event that we're unable to answer your question during the call, we'll be sure to follow up with you offline. All right, so the first question that we have is about sps.impinj.com. A user has gone to that site and it was testing it out apparently, and what they see there looks different than what you showed in your tool here, Larry. Can you explain why they make it?
Sure. So the version of the tool that's available online looks exactly like this, except for some of the boxes are grayed out. The numbers are still there, but you can't edit them. So you have a limited number of parameters that you can adjust in the free version. And that's in part because, we want to be there to coach you in the proper use of a tool like this and work with you there. So if you want access to the full tool, please get in touch with us and we'll make sure that gets done right.
Okay. Has simulation been used in other retail settings that you know about?
Yeah, in retail settings, there's been some published work that has to do with simulation in retail, but focusing on an operational model like this, I haven't seen. What I do want to stress, though, is that simulation is not a new concept in commercial applications. Simulation is used extensively in areas where experimentation is difficult or hard. One example that I'll give you really quickly is in automobile safety crash testing. Cars used to be crashed to find out if the dummy was injured or not. But today they're crashed just to make the simulation models better, and the true safety test is in the simulations themselves. So simulation is something that the commercial industry and you as consumers rely on heavily today, and is a very well-regarded technology in many applications.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll just add to that, I think a lot of retailers probably have some what-if capability related to very particular metrics. So when they're doing buying or doing a merchandise financial plan, they might be able to see the how overall performance is impacted by tweaking price and dependent on cost and volume and that sort of thing. But I also have not seen anything this comprehensive and complete. And right now, retailers are really, really interested in the whole store performance execution piece, and this is this really nails that. And that wasn't intended to be a plug. It's just my opinion.
Thanks, Leslie.
Okay. Next question is the simulator seems to just look at in-store shoppers. How does a simulation take into account online and mobile shoppers?
So that's something we thought about quite a bit. And in fact, what the simulator really does is say, how does inventory visibility and inventory accuracy and availability, how is it affected by activity in your store? And the fundamental connection between that and an online shopper is that today shoppers have different expectations than they've had in the past. In the past, they've been willing to go to a store and hope for the best. Today, they want to show up to a store, and if you don't have what they want in that store, that's a big disappointment, and they're going to question whether they should come back. And in addition, they're going to probably want to check before they go whether the item they want is on the shelf. And if you don't have good data, you can't give that information to your customer, and you can't even do a good job of fulfilling online shopping requirements from in-store inventory. So there's a deep connection between the mentality of today's shoppers and the demands on your business and the ability to improve your store operations.
Okay, since we're just about, or starting to run over
Probably
on
are
time,
on
I'm going
time.
to just do one last question. How did you validate the simulator in the case study you talked about?
Well, that's actually probably a long answer rather than a short one, but this will be true, for anybody out there who's interested in trying this approach. You can play with this offline and have fun with it and learn some things from it. But if you want to use it as an effective business tool, you have to do what we did, which was go deep. Talk to people who run your stores. Talk to the people who support your customers when they come into the shop. Find out what's really happening in your store and bake that into the tool. And we will find out that that we will get very close to what's really happening on your financial statements. So I would say the answer is it was about going in and spending time with that retailer, spending time in their stores, and making sure that we had the right assumptions built into the model.
Okay, thank you, Larry. And again, we truly appreciate everyone's time today. We'll have a copy of this presentation posted on our website hopefully by the end of this week. And if you have any questions or would like additional information, please don't hesitate to contact us. We will be sending up a follow-up email to everyone letting them know when the presentation is available. Thank you very much.